When police arrived, they discovered a crime scene they would never forget. The early morning sun was just beginning to rise over a quiet suburb of Sacramento, California. Birds were chirping, lawns sparkled with dew. Neighbors stepped out onto their porches with cups of coffee. An ordinary Tuesday in an ordinary neighborhood. But when the first patrol officer stepped across the threshold of the house on Elmwood Drive, he stopped. He simply froze in the doorway, unable to take another step. In 22 years of service, Officer David Morrow had seen everything. Car crashes, shootings, bodies he wished he had never seen. But this was something different. Later, he would tell reporters a single sentence that would become the headline in hundreds of newspapers across the country. I walked in there as a police officer, and I walked out a completely different person. A man's body lay in the living room. But it wasn't just the body, it was the way he was lying, and it was what surrounded him. On the walls, on the furniture, even on photographs of what looked like a happy couple, there were messages. Not written in blood like in cheap horror movies. Instead, they were neatly typed on white sheets of paper and carefully placed around the room. 7 pages, 7 phrases, and each one was addressed to the detectives who would eventually arrive. The first page was lying directly on the victim's chest. It contained only 3 words: "You are too late." This is the case of Reed Collin, and to this day, it still haunts everyone who has ever worked on it. There are crimes that happen and are quickly forgotten. There are crimes that make the news for a day or two, only to disappear beneath the endless flood of new stories. And then there are crimes that change the system, the kind that force investigators to rewrite protocols, retrain detectives, and even reconsider the laws themselves. The case of Reed Collin is one of those cases. When the story first appeared in the news in September, most people thought it was just another family tragedy. Domestic conflict, money, jealousy, the usual explanation. But the deeper investigators dug into the details, the less ordinary the case became. This story had everything. A perfectly planned murder, a victim living a double life, carefully calculated psychological manipulation, and a person who almost slipped through the fingers of justice. I'm going to tell you this story the way it actually happened, step by step, detail by detail, without embellishment, without simplification, because this case deserves to be told honestly. And because within this story there is one moment, one specific moment that turned the entire investigation upside down. A moment so shocking that even experienced detectives could hardly believe what they had just discovered. So, Sacramento, California, a quiet neighborhood called Rockland in the northeastern part of the city. Homes here cost anywhere from $700,000 to $1 million. The lawns are perfectly maintained, the cars are spotless. People smiled at each other on the street, never imagining what might be happening behind their neighbors' closed doors. This is the kind of place where nothing bad is supposed to happen. And that is exactly why what happened here. Reed Collin was not a celebrity. He wasn't a billionaire, and he wasn't living a secret double life as an undercover agent. At least that's what it seemed. He was 41 years old, 6 feet tall, dark hair that had just begun to turn gray at the temples. He worked in financial consulting, helping wealthy private clients manage their investments. The pay was good, very good. Reed was born in Portland, Oregon, into a typical middle-class family. His father was an engineer. His mother was a school teacher. He had an older brother who now works as a doctor in Denver. Reed had always been the quieter one, smart but reserved. In school, he was a top student, but he had almost no friends. At the University of California, Davis, he became one of the best students in the finance program. But once again, he remained someone without a close circle of people around him. Colleagues described him as a functional person, polite, precise, predictable. He arrived at the office at 8 in the morning and left at 6 in the evening. He never missed deadlines. He never raised his voice. His clients loved him. His colleagues respected him. But none of them, not a single one, could call him a real friend. 5 years ago, Reed married Megan Harris. She was 6 years younger, 35 at the time of his death.
an architect who, shortly after the wedding, opened her own small studio. From the outside, they looked like the perfect couple. He brought money and stability. She brought creativity and charisma. On Meghan's Instagram page, there were hundreds of photos of what looked like a happy marriage, trips to Tuscany, weekend getaways in Napa Valley, dinner parties with friends on the large wooden terrace of their home. But there is one detail you notice almost immediately if you look closely at those photos. In none of them is Reed truly smiling. In every picture, he stands slightly to the side, just a little outside the center of the frame, like someone who knows he's being photographed but isn't entirely sure why. As investigators would later discover, their marriage was far more complicated than any Instagram page could ever reveal. But we'll come back to that later. For now, there is one important thing you need to know about Reed Collin. He was a man with secrets, big secrets, and someone out there knew about them.
Reed Collin's body was discovered by his wife, Meghan, at 6 o'clock on a Tuesday morning. According to her statement, she had just returned from a 2-day business trip to Los Angeles, where she had been meeting with a potential client. She drove home, unlocked the door with her key, and immediately felt that something wasn't right. The lights in the house were on, lights she was certain she had not left on. She walked into the living room, and that's when she saw her husband. Her call to 911 lasted 4 minutes and 17 seconds. The recording of that call was later given to investigators and partially released to the public. Meghan spoke calmly, almost too calmly for someone who had just discovered her husband's body. But psychologists explained it as shock. People react differently in moments like that. Now, about the murder itself, because this is where the case begins to take a strange turn. Reed Collin was killed by a single blow to the back of the head with a heavy, blunt object. The strike was precise, not excessive, not chaotic. According to the medical examiner's report, whoever delivered the blow either had medical knowledge or had done something like this before. Death was instant. Reed never had time to react. There were no defensive wounds on his hands, no broken nails, no bruises suggesting he tried to fight back. He simply never saw it coming. The murder weapon turned out to be a bronze horse statue that had been sitting on a bookshelf in the living room. It belonged to Reed, a birthday gift from his father when he turned 40. The killer had grabbed the first heavy object available in the room. That could mean the crime wasn't planned, or it could mean someone wanted it to look that way. The statue was later found in the corner of the room, carefully wiped down, but not perfectly. On one small edge of the horse's leg, forensic analysts found a microscopic trace of blood visible only under ultraviolet light. And then there were the 7 sheets of paper, the most unusual part of the entire crime scene. Each sheet had been printed on a standard office printer, font Times New Roman, size 14. Each page contained a single short sentence. Detectives quickly realized something important. These weren't messages written for dramatic effect. Each sentence contained a clue, hints about things the killer knew, hints about Reed's secrets. The first page, placed on the victim's chest, read, "You are too late." The second page, on the fireplace, he knew this would happen. The third, under the television, ask about the account in Reno. The fourth, placed on the staircase, she knew too. The fifth, in the bedroom, on Meghan's pillow, 3 years, every Thursday. The sixth, in Reed's home office, lying on top of his laptop, money always leaves a trail. And the 7th page, taped to the bathroom mirror, this was not the first death. That 7th message made the detective stop. This was not the first death. What did that mean? Was the killer confessing to a previous murder? Was it a reference to something in Reed's past? Or was it a psychological trick designed to send investigators down the wrong path? At that moment, the case stopped being a simple homicide. And that's when the detective who would eventually solve it stepped into the investigation. Detective Angela Costa, 44 years old, Homicide Division, Sacramento Police Department, 20 years in law enforcement, 8 of them working murder cases. She had solved 73 investigations. She had failed 2, and she remembered the names in both of those cases. Costa was known for her methodical approach. She never rushed to conclusions. She never fell in love with a single theory, and she never decided who was guilty before the evidence pointed to the answer. But even she, walking into that house and reading those 7 pages, felt something she always tried to avoid in her work. She felt like someone was taunting her, and that was something she absolutely hated. The first 72 hours in any homicide investigation are the most critical. Detective Costa knew that better than anyone. So she started with the obvious: the people around Reed, his habits, and his money. The first interrogation was with Megan Collin. The widow handled it well. Too well, if we're being honest, but Costa filed that observation away in a separate mental folder for later. Megan confirmed everything. Yes, she had traveled to Los Angeles. Yes, there were hotel records and receipts. Yes, she had met with a potential client, a design studio on Wilshire Boulevard. Detectives checked the details. Everything matched. Her alibi was solid, or at least it looked solid. Reed's colleagues at the financial services firm Meridian Capital described him as a little distant lately. One of the partners, Clint Ward, mentioned that about 3 months before his death, Reed had begun acting strangely. He spent more time behind closed office doors. He made frequent phone calls. One morning, he arrived looking exhausted, clearly sleep-deprived. And once, when a coworker walked too close to his computer screen, Reed abruptly ended a conversation and shut the laptop. Then there was the third note: ask about the account in Reno, Nevada, about 3 hours from Sacramento by car. Detectives requested Reed's financial records, and what they found was unexpected. For 3 years, Reed had been transferring a fixed amount of money every single month, $9,800. The payments went to an account at a small bank in Reno. The account was registered under a company with a neutral name, RK Consulting, LLC. No obvious legal footprint, no actual services provided. Then came the fifth note: 3 years, every Thursday. Detective Costa began reviewing phone records. Every Thursday, starting 3 years earlier, Reed left the office at 5 in the evening, an hour earlier than usual. His phone would then connect to cell towers near a Marriott on the outskirts of Sacramento. Every Thursday, without exception, except for 2. 1 week when he was sick, and 1 week just 7 days before his murder. Reed Collin had been having an affair, a long-term, carefully hidden affair, and Costa wanted to know with whom. Hotel records from the Marriott revealed a name: Shannon Porta, 38 years old, a nurse at UC Davis Medical Center. Costa decided to visit her in person. Shannon opened the door and immediately understood why the detective was there. She had already heard about Reed's death on the news, and she had already been crying, not in front of Costa, before Costa arrived. Shannon Porta told the detective everything. She and Reed had met at a corporate charity event. She was volunteering, he was one of the sponsors. They began seeing each other about a month later. Reed never promised to divorce Megan, but he also never clearly said he would stay with her. He simply existed in 2 parallel worlds, and both of those worlds believed he belonged to them. Then there was the third note: ask about the account in Reno. Detectives requested Reed's financial records, and what they found was unexpected. For 3 years, Reed had been transferring a fixed amount of money every single month, $9,800. The payments went to an account at a small bank in Reno. The account was registered under a company with a neutral name, RK Consulting, LLC. No obvious legal footprint, no actual services provided. Then came the fifth note: 3 years, every Thursday. Detective Costa began reviewing phone records. Every Thursday, starting 3 years earlier, Reed left the office at 5 in the evening, an hour earlier than usual. His phone would then connect to cell towers near a Marriott on the outskirts of Sacramento. Every Thursday, without exception, except for two. 1 week when he was sick, and 1 week just 7 days before his murder. Reed Collin had been having an affair, a long-term, carefully hidden affair, and Costa wanted to know with whom. Hotel records from the Marriott revealed a name, Shannon Porta, 38 years old, a nurse at UC Davis Medical Center. Costa decided to visit her in person. Shannon opened the door and immediately understood why the detective was there. She had already heard about Reed's death on the news, and she had already been crying. Not in front of Costa, before Costa arrived. Shannon Porta told the detective everything. She and Reed had met at a corporate charity event. She was volunteering, he was one of the sponsors. They began seeing each other about a month later. Reed never promised to divorce Megan, but he also never clearly said he would stay with her. He simply existed in two parallel worlds, and both of those worlds believed he belonged to them. Then Shannon said something that made Costa freeze inside. He was afraid, Shannon said. The last 2 months, he was really afraid. He kept saying someone knew, that someone was watching him. At first, I thought he meant Megan, but he said no, it wasn't Megan. He said it was someone else, someone he had done something bad to a long time ago. He never told me the details, but one night he said something I remember word for word. There are things you eventually have to pay for. I just thought I would have more time. Then there was the 6th note. Always leave a trail. Costa returned to the financial records, RK Consulting LLC in Reno. The registration led to a proxy director, a common trick used to hide ownership. But the registered office address pointed to a specific suite in a business center in Reno. The office was rented by a man named Terry Oakland, 46 years old, a former accountant, and a man who had once worked at Meridian Capital, the same company as Reed, 7 years earlier. Costa pulled the records from that case, and there it was. 7 years ago, Reed Collin had testified against Terry Oakland during an internal investigation into embezzlement. Because of Reed's testimony, Oakland didn't just lose his job, he served 3 years in federal prison. His career was destroyed, his marriage collapsed, his daughter stopped speaking to him. Terry Oakland had a motive, a strong one, a personal one, and a very old one. He also had an accounting background. He understood financial systems, he knew how money moved, and for 3 years he had been receiving monthly transfers from Reed Collin, $9,800, just below the $10,000 threshold that would automatically trigger financial reporting requirements under U.S. regulations. This wasn't simple revenge, this was extortion, careful, methodical, documented extortion. But that raised another question. If Oakland was receiving money every month, why kill the man paying him? Why destroy the golden goose? Then there was the 4th note. She knew too. Costa went back to Megan.
This is where everything turns upside down. Detective Costa asked Megan Collin to come in for questioning again. This time it was official, at the police department. Megan arrived with her lawyer, which in itself was already a signal. She repeated the same story. The hotel in Los Angeles, the meeting with a client, the receipts, everything lined up. But Costa asked a question she hadn't asked before. Mrs. Collin, have you ever heard the name Terry Oakland? Megan paused. Just 2 seconds, only 2. But Costa had been doing this job for 20 years and she knew exactly what 2 seconds of silence meant. No, Megan said, I don't recall that name. Costa slid a printed document across the table. Megan's phone records from the past 6 months. One number was highlighted. That number had called Megan 18 times, and it was registered to a shell company connected to Terry Oakland in Reno. Megan looked at the paper, then she looked at her lawyer, then she looked back at Costa, and she said nothing. But that wasn't the real surprise. The real moment came the next day when Costa received the DNA results from the crime scene. Remember the 7th note? This was not the first death? Until that moment, Costa had assumed it was a provocation or a metaphor. But just in case, she had asked analysts to search the database of unsolved cases across 3 states, California, Nevada, and Oregon. The criteria was simple: male victims, death caused by a blow from a blunt object, any written messages left at the crime scene. The database returned one match, a case from 5 years earlier, Portland, Oregon. The victim was Daniel Forrest, 43 years old, a financial consultant. He had been killed in his home by a single blow to the back of the head. At the scene, investigators had found one sheet of paper, just one. It contained a single sentence: bills have to be paid. The case had remained unsolved for 5 years. Costa opened the old case file, and inside it she found a name she already recognized. Daniel Forrest had once worked with Reed Collin at Meridian Capital, and it was Forrest, not Reed, who had first discovered Terry Oakland's embezzlement. Reed had simply confirmed the testimony. Same crime, same method, 5 years apart. But this is where things became even more complicated. The DNA sample recovered from Forrest's case in Portland matched the DNA found in Reed Collins' house, the exact same genetic profile. But when forensic analysts ran the DNA through CODIS, the federal criminal DNA database, the result was unexpected. The DNA did not belong to Terry Oakland. It belonged to a woman who had never been arrested. She had never appeared in any criminal investigation, but her DNA had entered the federal system for another reason. 5 years earlier, she had submitted biometric data while applying for a job at a federal institution. Her name was Lauren Oakland, Terry Oakland's daughter. The same daughter who, according to Terry, had stopped speaking to him after he went to prison. Or maybe she never stopped. Maybe that distance between father and daughter had been carefully staged, a performance for anyone who might start asking questions. Detective Costa sat at her desk at 1 a.m, staring at a photograph of Lauren Oakland she had found on social media. 31 years old, medical education. She works as a nurse at UC Davis Medical Center. Lauren Oakland and Shannon Porter were colleagues. They worked in the same department. Costa closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them again and began typing the warrant for Lauren Oakland's arrest.
The arrests happened simultaneously, early Thursday morning, which, if you think about it, was strangely symbolic. Thursday had been the day Reed went to the Marriott Hotel. Now Thursday meant something entirely different. Terry Oakland opened a door of his apartment in Reno wearing pajamas, a cup of coffee still in his hand. He didn't run. He didn't even look surprised. He simply placed the coffee on a small table beside the door, extended his hands, and said calmly, "I waited longer than I thought I would." Lauren Oakland was arrested in Sacramento. She was leaving the hospital parking garage after finishing a night shift. She said nothing at all, not until the interrogation. Megan Collin was detained separately, as an accessory after the fact and for obstruction of justice. Her alibi, as it turned out, had been real. She truly had been in Los Angeles, but she knew what was going to happen. She knew about the plan, and she did nothing to stop it. More than that, the 18 phone calls from Oakland's number, she had been coordinating her absence with the date of the murder. Her marriage to Reed had long since become a fiction. Megan knew about Shannon, she knew about the extortion, and when Terry Oakland approached her through Lauren, through a coworker who had casually mentioned that her colleague's husband had been extremely nervous lately, Megan didn't push him away. She listened, and then she said something that would eventually seal her legal fate. "If it happens, I didn't see anything." At the trial, the prosecutor played recordings of all 18 phone calls. In several of them, Megan openly discussed the date. Not the details, not the method, she was smart enough not to ask about that, but the date. And that was enough. Lauren Oakland's interrogation lasted 6 hours. For the first 4, she said nothing. Her lawyer answered every question with formal responses. But during the 5th hour, Detective Costa did something she was very good at. She placed a photograph on the table. It was a picture of Daniel Forrest from Portland, not a crime scene photo, just a photograph of him alive. In it, he was smiling. "Tell me about him," Costa said, calmly, without pressure. And Lauren Oakland began to speak. She told them everything, methodically, in detail, without emotion, almost as methodically as she had arranged those 7 sheets of paper at Reed's house. She had been preparing for these crimes for years. The first one, Forrest, in Portland, had been, in her words, a test. At that time, she didn't know whether she would be capable of doing it. It turned out she was. And then she waited 5 years. She waited for her father to get out of prison. She waited for them to build the extortion scheme together because they needed money. But they also needed something else. The money was for her father. The death was for her. She never denied that. When the prosecutor asked why she had left those 7 pages at Reed's house, Lauren gave an answer that made the entire courtroom fall silent. "I wanted everyone to know who he was. He destroyed my family and went on living, beautifully, comfortably, with a wife, a mistress, and a large house. I didn't want him to simply disappear. I wanted the truth to live after he died. Those pages weren't a message to the police, they were a message to his world." The verdict was delivered in November, 14 months after Reed Collins' death. Lauren Oakland received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for 2 counts of first-degree murder. She did not cry in court. Terry Oakland was sentenced to 22 years for extortion, conspiracy, and aiding the crime. When the judge read Lauren's sentence, Terry looked at his daughter. Everyone in the courtroom later described the expression on his face the same way. It wasn't grief, it wasn't pride. It was something in between, something for which there isn't a precise word. Megan Collin received 8 years for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. Her lawyer appealed the sentence, but the appellate court upheld the ruling. By the time she is released, she will be 43 years old. The house on Elmwood Drive was eventually sold at auction. The new owners completely renovated it.
So what did this case leave behind? There is the obvious part. The killer was caught. The verdict was delivered. Justice, at least formally, was served. The system worked. Detective Costa received a departmental commendation. The prosecutor's career gained momentum. Journalists wrote their stories. But there is another part. A part that doesn't fit neatly into court documents. Reed Collin was not an innocent victim in the classic sense. For years, he lived inside layers of deception. He lied to his wife. He lied to his lover. And perhaps most of all, he lied to himself. The money he paid Terry Oakland was a quiet admission of guilt, an admission that his testimony 7 years earlier might not have been exactly what it should have been. He never confessed to that openly, and now he never will. Daniel Forrest in Portland, the first victim, the one no one knew about for 5 years, left behind a wife and 2 children. For 5 years, they lived without answers. For them, this case brought not only justice, but a truth that arrived far too late, if that can even be called comfort. Shannon Porta resigned from UC Davis Medical Center 1 month after Lauren Oakland's arrest. She moved to Seattle. There has been no public information about her since. Maybe that's for the best. And now, Lauren Oakland now sits inside a federal correctional facility in California. According to reports, she has a library card. She reads a lot, mostly books about medicine and law. Inmates in her unit say she never talks about her case. Never. Except once. According to one corrections officer, a younger inmate once asked her if she regretted what she had done. Lauren Oakland closed the book she was reading, looked at the woman, and said only one sentence: "I regret that he did it first." And that's where this story ends. There are no simple villains here.
and no simple victims. There are only decisions people made over years, small decisions, quiet compromises, and the moment when those decisions finally come due. This was the case that shocked America, not because it was supernatural, but because it was something far more unsettling, something deeply human, something painfully familiar, something that looks a little too much like the things we all try not to see. Sacramento doesn't feel quite as quiet anymore. At least not for those who know that street. At least not for those who know this story. And now, you know it too.